I don't know why I'm here.
You're here because you're always supposed to be here.
He said he didn't want to be here.
Pretty good place. This is going to be fun.
What is that? 18? Yeah, for sure. 18.
Popping it open.
Marital.
The
I'll take
title is Marital Strife.
Good one. Jeez.
What does that make you think of?
Yeah,
Or what happens when you don't agree? How do you handle cultural disagreements? How do you find a middle ground or continue to work forwards when something is in dispute? Give an example.
choose.
Heavily demanding.
Heavily demanded.
Choose.
What do you mean by cultural disagreement?
So for Cat and Cloud, we have
Give an
three-
example.
For Cat and Cloud, we have three.
Choose.
We have three owners.
Orners.
We're
And-
three
all
corners,
very
dude.
ornery.
Ornery.
Oh.
And so it's the question of what happens when we're working on a project or making a decision, and it often happens where people just don't agree on things. For example, 2 Fridays ago, we were in our Friday meeting and we were talking about training, and Herman just didn't agree with something that Jen Swen was saying. Like, it was just a fundamental disagreement. And so how do you have disagreements and work forward on them? Or I don't know if you three owners were ever working on you just spent a lot of time working on the
We've never
values.
disagreed, actually.
Never once.
It's been smooth sailing.
It's been so
Everything's
clean.
been perfect.
We are currently redoing our values, and you guys as owners just spent a lot of time reworking them. Was there a time during all of that you guys didn't agree, or there was a disagreement? And how did you either work through that or agree to disagree and move forward?
The values were surprisingly
Yeah, we're pretty dialed.
easy. I don't really think there were any disagreements in that. It was more about clarification. What's the best word or phrase for this?
Yeah.
In that example, Friday is an interesting one because you've got two people on completely opposite sides of the spectrum. Man, that's a tricky one.
Marital strife, man.
Marital strife.
I was also thinking about the time on a Friday meeting when we were talking about a specific policy that Chuck understood one way and you understood another way.
Sure.
And there was just a disagreement, but then it worked itself out in the communication phase. But still, it's just like, how do you deal with those? I guess if I'm playing the mental game of chess, it's like, well, you have the conversation. You have the conversation, you base it off of your values, you have a common understanding of what the work is supposed to be,
Sure.
and you go from there. That's how I would mentally play this game, but I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts
I mean,
on the topic.
I'd say in general, if you have the right people on the bus and in those seats, that you're going to be able, for the very most part, to get to a place where there's an understanding. And, right, not everybody always gets their perfect fairy tale direction, right? But I think we've mostly experienced this. There's usually a place where there's enough common ground where they're like, cool, that's the best move for now. But it does come down to the conversation. It comes down to understanding each other's point of view. And then it comes down to, hopefully, I feel like where it gets harder is where you have maybe less experience or less ability to talk about where the decisions are going to lead, where it kind of comes down to mostly just feelings in the moment. That's where I think it gets more challenging, where it's like, well, I like it this way and I like it this way. And neither party really has like if we implement X, Y, or Z, this is where it's going to play out in the long run. Those were the challenging conversations are most challenging for me.
Are you talking about compromises?
No, I wouldn't even call it. Sure, it could be compromises, but where it's compromise where you don't necessarily have like a vision or an outcome, or you haven't necessarily thought through how the process works and integrates. For me, that's always where it's the biggest struggle, where it's just like, I like it this way in this concept, whether it's aesthetically or where it's literally just based on how I feel as a human being and like what I want it to feel like, versus walking it through and be like, here's how the implementation looks as we walk down the line of my decision or your decision rolling out, like what's next. And For me, if there's not enough clarity or I can't find the clarity in where somebody's trying to go with the conversation, that's where I have the hardest time. It's just like, I just feel like you're saying a lot of things, but you don't necessarily have a clear reason or a clear outcome. You just have a place you want to be next that's different than the place you want to be here. That's I mean, an example, there's many examples, and it all depends on who's interested in what, but I mean, you could come down to we talk about it a lot. What's the next best step to moving us where we need to go versus the perfect outcome of what this picture could look like? And because we look at this perfect or lack thereof, we just stop. We don't work because I can't make this thing perfect, so I don't move. That's one for me that's always tough.
Yeah.
Where it's like, that's hard because it's like, well, we both see the end result, but for some reason nothing's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a slightly different example, but one
Sure.
where you can agree and nothing's happening. That's tough.
Like, what's an example of that in real life?
Like a great example would be something we need clearly, but we haven't either agreed to a real clear deadline, or we haven't all agreed that it needs to happen at a pace that is necessary, and so we kind of live in limbo. It could be anything, right? It could be HR policies, it could be a training implementation, it could be assessments. Like, we have kind of things internally right now that are kind of like almost ready to go, but just not done. That could be really helpful, which we talked a little bit on a couple Fridays in a row.
Yeah.
Things like those things, I think, but we don't always have answers, right? That's always a conversation too, is where are the resources and the time, etc. That is always hard.
Yeah.
That didn't give you an answer. It gave you some examples of where I struggle with it, because I think everybody sees things differently in terms of priority and intensity of need. And I think where I live, which can be good and frustrating at times, is if I see 3 things that I think can change, I want them all done at the same time as fast as possible. And that doesn't always work for everybody.
How you feeling, Chris?
Feel great.
Do you have any thoughts about
Marital stress.
Yeah.
About marital strife?
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. So from the perspective of an owner, disagreements are interesting, because one of the things that's weird about being a business owner is that you have this thing that feels like it's directly tied to your self or your identity in some way, shape, or form. And things go really well when you want to take ultimate pride of your work and you can put your stamp on it. So if I can take something that we're working on and say, cool, I'm going to give this the Chris Baca seal of approval. This is A to Z. Boom. I back this shit all the way. That feels really good to me.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're working with a group of people, especially if you have partners, almost nothing is exactly like that. There's like almost nothing that I can say 100%. I'm like, this is exactly how I would do it if it were just me.
There's levels of compromise that have to get made so everybody can approve or agree.
Yeah, and then there's a couple ways you can think about it. In one way, you can think about it as a compromise where I don't get exactly what I want because someone else is, taking some of that away. Or you could say there's 3 people who each have a vision, and by putting our brains together, we don't get what each individually wants, but we can create a higher level vision. Like what we create is something better than what we initially thought was possible.
Yeah.
So that's and sometimes that is true, and then sometimes it does feel like a compromise. So there's a ton of.
It might also not be a compromise based on. People might put limiting things on it. So, for example, thinking in creating a cafe, you guys might want the quality to be, at a certain level, and then Chuck might come in and set a budget and say like, okay, cool, but your cost of goods is too high, so we need to be under here. So there's just like the push and pull of what's required for the business to run. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I mean that's a
like a grabbable example.
really easy one to understand.
Sure.
And I think sometimes both of them are true. Like sometimes it does feel like a compromise where I'm just like, shit, this isn't really what I wanted, but this is probably the best way forward. or it seems like it's the best way forward,
Yeah.
or maybe I don't even think that it's the best way forward, but everyone else thinks it is, and then
Those are the moments that I'm
then I have
curious
to
about.
wrestle with the fact of, well, what's more likely, that I'm right and everyone else in the room is an idiot, or maybe I have something to learn? And I think that's an important thing to think, because I can't be right all the time. And then sometimes it does feel like we are able to create a higher level vision, and wrestling with that, it's, I don't have a system for processing those things in my mind other than saying, well, to go back to what I was originally talking about, and this feels like it ties into like a bigger cultural piece that's happening in all these other ways. I mean, if you take something like a bio on social media, right? Okay, cool. You have an Instagram, or you have a TikTok, or you have a YouTube, and then there's this like bio, right? It's like, okay, how do I write my bio? How do I take these 100 characters and squeeze everything that I am into this thing so that people completely understand me and know what I'm about? And the answer is you don't. It's impossible. Most of us are so many different things that no matter what we write, we can't encapsulate a complete picture of ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So an extension of that for me has to be that I am not Cat and Cloud, and Cat and Cloud is not me. It is completely okay to work with other people and to do things that I don't fully agree in if it's for the betterment of our organization. That doesn't mean that I'm not who I am. It doesn't mean that I'm compromising myself in some way. It just means that this tiny little sliver of what I do is just not optimized for me. And that's okay. We don't always get what we want all the time.
So you said that there's moments where the other people, you might disagree with the other people in the room, and at that moment you ask yourselves, is everybody else wrong and I'm right, or is there something for me to learn here? Is there an example of that where you learned something?
Oh man, it's really hard to think of on the fly.
Sure, no, totally.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah,
I would say specifically it's hard to think about, but the simple, true answer is that every single time, right? I mean, if you're an open-minded business owner, every single time there's a deep discussion, you learn something or a new perspective, and you can. I'd even say to your point, like, you might not get your perfect outcome in any capacity, but you probably could get a really important portion of that stamp into the mix, and you'd be like, oh yeah, but that perspective over there makes a lot of sense. And you have to, like, the bigger you get, we're in this, I'll call it, I don't know, growing pains in between stage, where you're like, we're not close enough to touch all the individuals in our organization, but there are people who are. And so if we don't pay attention to what they have to say and learn from it, just assuming because we've been in this business for 20 plus years that we know more, like, that's not what he or I ever do. Asking questions is one thing, but assuming we know better is actually unwise if you do it and across the whole company, broad strokes, broad scope. There are things that we're, no matter what, are going to know and intuitively will be able to help us, leapfrog farther down the road because of experience, and because we know, hey, we've tried these 20 things that you're talking about many times over. These are the 2 or 3 that have worked for us, and trust me, it's been 20 years. We know there's that part, but then there's things, the world evolves, right? It does. Like, we're not going to be able to be finger on the pulse the same way we used to be when we were touching every place. And we say that every time, but that's where we learn. To me, that's where you check yourself and you go, I'm having feelings based on my experience, but the world has changed, and my experience isn't fully null and void anymore at all by any means, but it might not be 100% accurate where it used to be probably 99, 100% accurate on whatever somebody throws at me. I don't know how to, this is way overly simple, but I don't know how to troubleshoot our Revel POS systems anymore. And some of the internal systems in our cafe have evolved beyond my scope. Therefore, I'm unhelpful there anymore, right? Which should happen, which means I should not specifically tell everybody how to run those things anymore. As, again, a really grabbable, easy example. So if somebody comes to me like, hey, this is not working, this is what I think we should do, I'm not gonna be like, I don't know, dude.
On the flip
We
side
used
of that,
to do it like this.
on the flip side of that, it's good to have perspective.
Right, and that's where you can challenge and be open and make sure that people aren't thinking inside the box by being too close.
But there's no ego there where you're coming in going, I am right no matter what. you're
There
coming.
might be some ego there, to be honest. I think we all have some.
I think
ego
we all
there.
have some ego, but I think in that moment where you come in and you help problem solve, or somebody says, like you were talking about problem solving with the POS,
Yeah.
and you might go, "Oh, this was back in the day. We did it this way."
Yeah.
Versus now, I don't know what all the
Mhm.
what all the outcomes are. But you might have clarity of, oh, well, we did it this way before because
Sure.
of all these reasons, and maybe those have gotten lost in translation.
Yeah, maybe overcomplicated
So
now. There's opportunity.
So having that, oh, that's why there's a dog. Sorry, I saw a dog and it's on a leash.
You did see a dog because you did see a dog, dude. These are truths.
We agree on that. Great.
And you
no
got two
strife
dogs
there.
right here, double perros.
It's a glitch in the matrix.
So, for example, I was looking at our weeks 1 through 8 tracker over the weekend. Never been trained in the cafe.
You have
Never.
not.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
And I started making paper edits to it just because stuff felt like there was extra stuff that could be like pared down or
Sure.
simplified into one thing.
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying I'm making decisions for other people, but it just was
Just
some outside perspective of like, oh, well, these things kind of go together, so just state them the once.
Yeah.
So outside perspective of somebody in the cafe, or when you're trying to make a decision as an owner group, somebody might have a different perspective that is helpful, even though you might not agree with it.
Sure.
Sorry, just bringing it back to
No,
the
I mean
strife
that's
part.
an example that could go into discussion, right? Because what happens with a lot of those things too, whether you did this or not in this context, there's a formulaic process to training that we have believed in, right? This might be what you did, it might not, and it won't be right or wrong even if you did.
Oh, yeah,
because
no.
it's great it'll be great to hear feedback, but things that we have done in the past, overload at the beginning, assume people have the context and the clues and the skills, and then it's hard. So instead of doing that, maybe you touch base on the same concept 2 or 3 times over a 6-month period and make sure you're touching back in and retraining. You may not be talking like this, but somebody might be like, dude, you already trained that. Why are we training it again? And if they don't understand the full concept, it's like, we're making sure that the training sets in because we understand that you can study for a test and ace a test, but not know shit.
Yeah.
And that's not, actually, that is the concept behind a lot of training where I think there's an opportunity, but we can go too far in every direction. So, I mean, that's a great conversation I've had before, right? It's like, well, we've already done that. Why are we training them again? And I'm not saying you're doing that.
Yeah,
but
no.
that's the first thing I think about when I hear edits on that stuff. So I'm like, I wonder if somebody who didn't have the context would read and be like, you trained espresso on whatever, week 8, we'll say. Why are you retraining on espresso basics on week 10 or something? And then be like, well, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And that's where you'd have a conversation, be like, oh, I get it, cool. Or somebody might.
How do you communicate your perspective?
What do you
Lengthily,
mean?
with a lot of words and time.
Anyone's perspective in a moment is, this is my intention for working on X, Y, or Z. For the 1 to 8 week training tracker, I was focusing on it from a perspective of, I'm trying to format it into this passport thing,
Sure.
which is a very skills based tool that we're creating, and the 1 to 8 week trainer tracker is very time based.
Teacher's edition too.
So
probably.
I was trying to make a time based thing fit into a skills based thing, which
great.
And so I was just trying to organize it into a way that could work in both. So that's my perspective. That's how I'm looking at this project. So how do you guys communicate your perspectives on any given project so that other people can understand what you're seeing as important and what you're seeing as the priority? Maybe that's a broad question, but it's just
really broad question.
In my mind, it helps calibrate everyone to know where everyone's coming from. I don't know if I have an
It
example
sounds like
for
you're
that.
asking, how do you have a conversation?
Sure. How do you have a conversation as owners?
Or how?
Well, or like maybe it's what's your general style and delivery and like where you come from too, which I mean is a little bit how you have a conversation.
Let me see if I can come up with an example.
I mean, my gut feeling would be to say it depends on what I'm doing, who I'm talking to. Those two things would shape how I communicated any given thing. Because I wouldn't communicate exactly the same way every single time with every single project, with every single person.
Well, why wouldn't you communicate the same way? Not as like I question, like you. It's just curious.
Right. Because different people respond different ways to certain kinds of communication. You know,
Okay.
some people are cool. Like my default communication style would to be really blunt and straightforward. Like someone who I feel like I could communicate with really well in my default communication style would be like Jen Swen. Like I could say whatever to her, she totally gets it. She's not taking things personally. She's like there's this understanding where she gets my native communication style really well. And not everyone is like that. I wouldn't communicate necessarily the same way to Mark. So it just depends on what we're doing and who we're doing it with. But keep going. Where are we going with this?
I think that's what you just said there is really, it's a matter of learning who you're talking to and learning how you work with other people on your team. Like, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking of how do you share your perspective on a situation so that the other people you're working with can know where you're coming from or why you think things are important. And being straightforward with somebody, that's a great communication style because then there's no confusion.
Well, I mean, you can be straightforward in a lot of different ways too,
Yeah.
because we have to be clear no matter what.
Yeah.
Right. But there's different ways of being clear. And sometimes I misjudge. Like Charles and I had that disagreement in the meeting. And from my perspective, Chuck really likes to he doesn't mind throwing blows a little bit, right? We'll go back and forth on things, and it almost feels like he likes the argument in some ways. And then we're both usually walking away, and it's fine. But I went way too hard, and he stood up and was like walking out of the meeting. And that wasn't my intention. That's not how I anticipated that going at all. That was a surprise to me. So on the fly, I was like, whoa, bro, where are you going? He's like, dude, you're just fucking talking shit to me. And I was like, okay, cool. I've completely misjudged the situation here, right? So I need to walk it back. And I'm just like, man, I didn't mean this, and that. I was really passionate about it. It wasn't intended to be a personal attack. And, I can totally see how it felt that way. And I wasn't trying to attack your character. And that was just a misjudgment. So that was, we were having a miscommunication and I made a misjudgment in that communication. And then we had to resolve it and move forward.
Yeah.
And that only took,
10
2 minutes or something
Maybe.
like that all
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Like in front of everybody, which is great. So it's okay to screw up on those things.
There's some level of humility there to where I can learn.
Well, I think
Did you say?
You're still trying to go in the same direction.
That's
though.
the
That's the
thing.
thing. Like
Yeah,
at
it
the end
all
of the day,
sets
we're
up
not
to,
trying to go somewhere different.
Everyone in that meeting has the same goals.
Yeah.
Even last week or 2 weeks ago,
Yep.
it's Jen Swen and Herman going back and forth on this thing and they're disagreeing on how to get there, but they both have the same goal. Like we both want to be able to onboard people, train them effectively in an expedient manner. Like that's the goal. And that is something to keep in mind, that even when you're disagreeing with someone, that you ultimately want the same outcome. And that was a funny one too, because I had my own thoughts on it, but at that moment I was just, okay, I'm just going to sit back and let this play out.
Yeah.
And see what happens. And we didn't reach any kind of conclusion, it felt like. And I saw certain things that were valuable in both sides, but in a situation like that, I would be completely happy to let either of them, have them work together on it if they wanted to and come up with a compromise, or allow either of them to kind of run their play for a certain given amount of time. Almost like prove it.
Yeah.
Not in a negative way, but okay, cool. This is what I think. We can run this for a quarter and see what happens. And
so
that's where so who would make that decision though? Because that'd be like either one of them or both of them would have to agree. Like, let's go.
they would make it together.
Yeah, you would hope. That might be
mean,
another part of this whole thing too. Is like, what happens when, in general, we get to places like that?
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, I was thinking about that when it was happening. Because the whole time I just wanted. There was this 15-minute run. Well, maybe was it that long?
It was a while.
It was a while. I might be exaggerating a little bit. Maybe closer to 10 minutes. But I was really restraining myself from just jumping in and saying, here's what I think, here's what I think, here's what I think.
Yeah.
We should do this, and that. But I don't. You could argue that that I would be qualified to make that decision since I've
Sure.
been working in cafes for almost 20 years in some capacity and have done a ton of training. But I don't know. It'd be better if they came to it on their own, I think. And then one of them could either say, because what's the value in having them both be like in a deadlock where neither of them is willing to move from their position? Like, that's not valuable at all, and it's not a very adult way to be. And I don't actually think that would happen. I think if we gave it to both of them, they would figure out something on their own
Yeah.
that they could both agree on and say, okay, cool. Or maybe they don't agree on it, but maybe it's like, okay,
They find
I hear what you're
metamorphosize.
saying.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you prove it, and I'll get your back as much as possible to make it work. Because if it works, that's awesome. Like, if you're right and I'm wrong, great. We still win because we both want the same thing. So let's throw everything we've got at this for 2 or 3 months, and then if it doesn't work, we can say that we tried, and then
There's no malice. You're not hoping
Yeah.
somebody will fail.
right, you're not trying to sabotage them because
Yeah.
again, it's still less. Let's say we're going with Herman's idea, right? It's going to be less work for everybody if that just works out first try.
Yeah.
If we spend a quarter running a play and that play
Works out.
works, everybody wins. We don't have to talk about it or think about it anymore. It's just established system.
Yeah.
So in that sense, even if it's not your idea, it actually still makes sense for you to try to support that person as much as you possibly can.
Right. What
So-
happens if both of the ideas could work? And or in general, what if we get to those places where people are voicing whatever we're voicing, but we're not necessarily moving? Because I think that's where I think about these things is it's like these conversations are super valuable, but then there's the rest. There's like the whole company at large that's still either waiting on or needing direction from their leaders. And what might we do or talk about how we approach when both the ideas are good, but what ends up happening is it's like a good conversation and everybody feels good at the end of at the end of the meeting, but there's like less integration plan. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, dude, I get you. Like we understand each other now.
I
I
hear
feel
you.
awesome, and then we just
they
walk
all
away.
walk away.
Well, I think our best value in that scenario is, again, not to choose for them, but to hold them accountable to say, okay, you are both really passionate about this and you both have your own individual
make it work.
ideas. By next week, we need you to work out which avenue you're going to take, who's going to be responsible, allow them to figure out the
Yeah.
project, but to put a finite time limit on it and to make it say, like, just to ensure that it doesn't begin and end as just this weird conversation
Right,
that
where
floats
everybody
away
feels better.
into the wind. to
Everyone
where
feels really positive, aligned, and then goes
Right.
and works on their own things
yeah,
again.
who's it going to be? Report back to us because we need to move this way.
Yeah.
Who's picking up the ball
How's it gonna be?
and running with it?
Right.
And that's where I was telling you earlier that I felt that on Friday at the meeting.
Yeah.
I came away, I was like, okay, cool.
You're gonna grab a
I'm
ball,
gonna grab a ball.
touch it, roll it, beat it.
Bump, 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 bump,
You get it.
bump.
That's the one. Bop it. Cha cha cha. So
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah. There was
So yeah, man. Just do it.
just communicate.
Oh.
The other thing that I was thinking of was Chris, you talked earlier about how stamping something of like, yeah, I agree with this 100% A to Z. I approve this. How do you separate yourself and your desires from the whole, from the bigger picture? For example, working on building out our roastery, I had that cultural dilemma of this doesn't feel. When I've worked with you on projects, Chris, I've seen you take them A to Z and you want everything to be perfect. But then the cultural difference at Cat and Cloud is, we do the best with what we can. We're always striving to be better, but there is no perfection. And so when I see things happen in projects where I can clearly see something that isn't perfect, but it's like I have to separate myself and just let it play out. Is there anything you do that helps you separate yourself from those moments to where you tell yourself like, oh, this is the system, I have to trust it? Or like for us as an example, what I took away from a conversation we had was I need to distract myself. I need to distract myself from the things that I'm seeing because there's nothing that I can do about them in the moment. And it's not helping the bigger picture by me perseverating on them.
Well,
I just used perseverating.
To be clear, I don't think that's what I encouraged you to do.
No,
Maybe that's what
that
you
was
came
my takeaway
away from it.
Yeah.
So
that was my
whatever.
takeaway 100%.
I mean, and then the idea of perfect is a really, really tricky thing because perfection doesn't exist, and with some projects you have way more leeway than others. So
Yes.
one of the things that we've talked about repeatedly, that when things are a hobby, you can kind of do whatever you want with them because you're not accountable to anything else. They exist solely for your satisfaction.
Yeah.
Right. So if it's a pet project, it's like, man, it can take 3 years. I can spend, however much money I want on it because it doesn't have to have any return on investment. It's just a thing that I'm doing. Whereas with a business, you do have those things, right?
Yeah.
You have a timeline, you have a budget, and you have restrictions. And even in hobbies, you have restrictions, but you can walk through them a little bit more, But I think perfect and being proud of something don't necessarily have to coexist. It's
That's
like
true.
everything that we've ever done here has been not perfect, yet I can
You're
look
so
at what we've
proud of
done and say, yeah, I should be proud of all this. This is awesome. You know what I mean? Especially considering where we started. It's amazing. There's nothing to not be proud of. I think one of the things, and tell me if I'm being too candid or you can edit this out, but from our conversation, one of the things that I was really trying to encourage you to do with the roastery build out specifically is trust the people around you, and you really care a lot. And that's something that you say, you're like, I just care a lot. 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 And you do. And I believe you. And that's true. And the thing is, so does everybody else. Like
Sure.
everybody else does too. And everybody else is doing the best that they can and doing a really good job. And we're all ignoring certain things that could be perfect to just get the thing done. So It's like when we're talking about moving into the roastery, what's the best example? Getting it done despite having a few little quirks be weird, or have it taking 3 months and having everything, buttoned up and buttoned in. And it's like, for me, getting it done feels more perfect than doing it perfectly, but having it take a long time, because the opportunity cost of having it take a long time, we just don't have that as a business. It's not better for anybody. It's actually worse for our customers and guests. It's worse for our wholesale partners. It's worse for our employees. It's just bad, So,
and it's really funny because me and Andre had like this moment last week where he was standing in the roastery looking at it, and like it was almost like we've swapped places because he was just like, what's up with that? What's going on here? I gotta talk to Nico. And then I was just like, it's gonna be great. We're gonna make it work.
Well, that's like kind of the nature of the beast. I mean, for me, that's from having a whole long life of just having to adapt and like do the best with what you have, and like resource management through this company. That's what you have to do all the time, or else you'll go insane. I mean, I probably liken myself more to someone like you who will overly pontificate on everything going on and try to figure it out. And that's super stressful. And at the same time, it is a little bit, because this has been the combination of the hobby meets the career. So that's really tough for me.
That's the other thing I was going to say.
This is hobby meets career for me. So,
Hey.
let them know, dude. It's you too. I bet you always wanted to drive freight.
That truck's backing up.
But it's the same thing. It's like I have, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse, the ability to kind of look at the whole picture and be like, how is this affecting the layers all the way down? And yeah, there are sometimes times where you're like, I'm going to trust this contractor to do the plumbing, and it might not be totally perfect, even though they've showed me three or four times how it's going to work great, versus waiting and finding somebody else to do it. And it's like the plumbing works 95%, maybe as good as it could have if we waited longer. But at the same time, it's just, there's other people there's people waiting on jobs. There's, we're paying time, we're paying rent, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And it all is opportunity costs. So I often look at things in the context of what's the guest experience going to be like, and the team experience and the leadership experience, and try to triangulate, in my experience and whatever, what we have resource-wise, and try to triangulate what's the best answer, including all of those things. And all those factorials are not really, it's not simple math. You don't get to be like, I'm going to do it like this. It's like, if we make that decision, here's all the things that suffer here, vice versa. And then you try to put together, like, this is my best guess on what we should do. And that's leadership, movement. That's everything in a nutshell. There's no way. The farther up you go, the more you see and you're responsible to. At the same time, so are everybody else. So you kind of have to do your very best to try to have everybody hit 80 to 90% versus have two places hit 100%. And there's always somebody frustrated by that. And I carry a lot of stress from that perspective, honestly, as a business owner, because you're not able to make everybody 100% happy anywhere, but you can do a good job everywhere.
Yeah, it's something you guys didn't start this company to make yourselves happy.
Well, I'd like to. That'd be cool.
I mean, yeah, you're making, but it's not like you over everyone else. You're creating
No.
a space to work for other people.
Yeah, I genuinely believe that we will make something that's better than the sum of the singular.
Well, it also, this is where it gets tricky, because regardless of how passionate we are about it, it is still a business. And a business has a different set of circumstances and rules than a strict hobby does.
Yeah.
It's like there could be a way where maybe you'd be willing to make the trade. Let's say if you were completely flush with cash, let's say we're just multi-millionaires and this was just going to be a hobby. We just want to open up one store and have everything be incredibly particular. That could exist.
Sounds very fun.
Right? That could happen.
Yeah.
But we don't have that situation. So we have to make some sort of a...
You're trying to create something that can sustain itself versus
And
a hobby
provide
that
for
you...
me.
Yeah, and provide versus doing something that's just for fun that if it fails...
Right. It's like we own this business, but it's also my job.
Yeah.
So if I don't have a job, a lot of things are kind of fucked for me.
There's people who work with us
yeah.
too, who we want to help with too.
So
Yeah.
that's, and that's on a personal, I mean, we started with a trade. It's even just having the three owners. When we started, it's like it necessitates immediately some sort of scale.
Yeah,
to
we
where
have to have at
one
least 3
store
stores.
is not going to be able to support, and you can see that more now. It's like
Yeah.
if we didn't have the size that we have, all the people that worked here wouldn't work here.
Yeah.
Our
We'd
executive
have no
team
managers.
wouldn't be as big. We wouldn't have a lot of the team leaders. It would just be, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I don't think bigger is better at all.
Yeah.
But it's just knowing what you need. It's like, okay, we're starting straight up with 3 people who need to be able to earn some sort of a living off of this thing, and if it goes bad, there's a ripple effect that's pretty big, and now the ripple effect kind of grows with when you grow, and that's frustrating too. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's not ideal.
Yeah.
At least not for me. I like boutique-y things. I like things as small as humanly possible. Like those are the things I love, and we're not big, but we're not small either.
Yeah. But you can still do small things inside of the big.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you can find ways to express yourself while serving others, even if everything you do isn't a pure expression of yourself. I don't see everything that we do as a pure expression of my highest form of art. And that's okay. Because again, I am not Cat and Cloud. Cat and Cloud is not me. But there are certain things within it where I'm just like, that's exactly what I love, and I'm really excited about that. And when those things come along, I can take extreme joy in them. And when other things are there that aren't that, I can still be proud of them and be like, that's awesome.
Hey everyone, that's the podcast for the week. Thanks so much for listening. If you heard something that inspired you, let us know or tell a friend. These are the types of connections that are the most important to us and that we seek to create every day. If there's something you heard and you want to know more about, send us an email to podcast@catandcloud.com or head to our website, catandcloud.com/podcast, and let us know. While you're on our site, check out everything we have to offer. Dive deep into one of our single origin coffees or pick up a little treat for yourself. We have something for everyone, so check it out. Also, find us in the usual places, YouTube, Instagram. We're always there sharing amazing things. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone for being awesome. We'll be back next week.